Hello there. One of the biggest news these days in Washington real estate investment is HB 1217, the proposed rent control bill. If this bill passes, it can change how landlords can adjust their rent, notify their tenants, and also overall how to manage their properties. With so many moving parts, understanding this bill could be very overwhelming. I'm no lawyer myself, but with a lot of industry help and even ChatGPT, I've done some research, and today I would like to share with you. My name is Nick. I'm a real estate investor and also a property manager. I manage over 600 properties in Washington State, mostly in King and Snohomish County. My goal is to help landlords like you and myself to stay informed, to minimize the risk, and to maximize our long-term return from our real estate investment. Today, I will cover three things. The first thing is, what is in HB 1217 and who is exempt? The second thing is, what happens if a landlord doesn't comply to the bill? And the third is, what should we do as a real estate investor and landlord? First, let's talk about what is in HB 1217. The biggest change in HB 1217 is rent control. If passed, Washington State will limit how much a landlord can increase the rent and lease renew for existing tenant. The limit is 7%. It will also require the landlord to provide the written notice at least 90 days from the lease end date, which is up from the current 60-day rule. So who will be exempt from this proposed bill? First, if your building was a newer property that built within last 12 years. So right now it's 2025. So if your building was built 2013 and later, you are exempt from this bill until your building becomes 12 years or older. Second, for owner-occupied properties, like if you're living in the house, you rent out your basement or your ADU, you're exempt from the rule. Third, for any nonprofit and religious properties, in that situation, they follow a different rule. So you may ask, how about finding a new tenant? The good news is, if your tenant move out, you need to find a new tenant, you can adjust the rent to the market rate and then without the 7% limitation. One thing I want to highlight is, like in the areas we manage, mostly King and Snohomish County, a lot of cities already have stricter rules than what the proposed bill, especially on the lease renew delivery date. Like for example, in Seattle, the lease renew increase, we need to deliver 180 days, which is almost 6 months from the lease end date. In a lot of cities like Kirkland, Issaquah, Woodinville, Redmond, just to name a few, if you want to increase rent 3% or more, you already need to follow a 120 days lease renew deliver notice. So if your city fall into any of those cities mentioned, and also there's actually more, so the city's stricter rule apply instead of the proposed HB 1217. The proposed bill actually also have a cap on the move-in fees, security deposit, and late fees on manufactured and mobile home. I don't want to go to details here. However, it is worth it to note that those cap fees and deposit were originally on other rental unit, like single family unit as well. However, it was removed later on the proposed bill. Next, we're going to be talking about what happens if the landlord violates the law. If the bill passed, the landlord who raised rent above 7% or without issuing at least a 90-day written notice could face some consequence. Originally, tenant can report any rent violations under the Consumer Protection Act. However, this was removed under the bill. Instead, if the tenant believes the rent increase was illegal, they need to first send a written demand letter to the landlord to ask the landlord to correct it. In many cases, I find that that's a very reasonable approach for real estate investors and landlords like us because it gives us a chance if we make a mistake to correct it. However, if the landlord does not correct it, the tenant can report up to Attorney General. So what's the penalties? There are three things. The first one is any rent excess pay need to pay back. And then the landlord may need to pay up to 3 times of the rent as a damage. Last but not least, any legal charge and attorney fees. So this make it more important than ever to make sure the rent increase, the lease renewal are handled properly. So now let's talk about the most important part. How can we real estate investors, landlords, and property managers handle the proposed HB 1217 rent control bill? While each investor handle their rental property differently, here's what I have been doing and what I plan to do. So I just want to share with everybody. There are two folds. First, we need to make sure our lease renew system is flexible and can be easily adjusted to the longer lease renew notice period. Since we already manage property in Kingdom, Snohomish County, already like 120 days, 180 days, so we have to actually segment our lease renew by cities. So in that case, we can comply with the current rule. For example, if a property in city of Kirkland, we already set it to be 165 days before the lease end, we'll start the rental analysis. So to make sure the landlord has enough time to respond and then to meet the requirement of 120 days. The key thing is a structured approach. It's very important to make sure we can meet up to the demand, to the ever-changing, the law, the situation. Secondly, and the most important thing is, we need to proactively manage our rental properties to do all the maintenance update that's needed. So in that case, we can make sure the rent price is at the market. So if the rent control bill passed, it won't really impact our rental rate. Remember, the rent control bill has less impact if our rental property is already at the market rate. I want to share a real example from my own rental property. I have this little single family house, actually 3-bedroom, not too big, in the Bothell area. Right now, the charge is $2,700 per month for the rent. I plan to raise it to $2,800 to just reflect about the market rate from this year to next year. If the rent control bill passed and 7% increase is around $186 or $89, I can't calculate that fast, but it's way above the $100 I plan to increase, which is the market rate. In that case, my property won't get impacted. That's why staying ahead of the market to maintain our property, make sure it's always at the market rate, will make the rent control bill has less impact on our properties and on our long-term return. Just want to sum up. While the HB 1217 is not yet a law, but if it passes, it will impact how landlords, investors operate their rental properties in Washington state. Here are the 5 key takeaways. First, rent increase will be capped at 7% per year for existing tenants. Second, 90-day written notice will be required for any rent increase notice. Third, tenant must send a written demand letter before taking any legal action. Fourth, if the city has a stricter rule, we need to follow the stricter rule. Fifth, and the most important thing, proactively preventive maintenance of the property to make sure the property is always in the great condition so we can charge as a market rent. In that case, we can minimize the rent control bill's impact to us. My name is Nick. I help landlords and real estate investors to manage properties in Washington state, just like how I manage my own properties. If you have any questions or any feedbacks, please feel free to make a comment below or just send me a direct message. If you like what we share and also want to listen more in the future, please hit subscribe and like. Thank you so much, and I wish you have a wonderful day and a wonderful 2025 ahead. Have a great day.